The desert night was silent except for the slow rhythm of the fire breathing inside the great Apache tent. Outside, the wind brushed over the sand like a restless spirit, carrying the scent of mesquite and smoke. The stars stretched endlessly above, bright and watchful. As if they had witnessed too many stories like this before, stories of pain, love, and survival in a land that gave nothing freely. Somewhere far beyond the hills a wolf howled, lonely and fierce, its cry blending with the sigh of the wind. Beneath that tent, beneath the soft orange glow of the flames, two lives were crossing paths in a way neither could have ever imagined. She had been brought here at sunset, half conscious, her face pale, and her dress torn from the thorns that lined the canyon trail. The white settler's wagon had been ambushed earlier that day, a storm of dust and fear, the sound of horses and gunfire echoing across the barren valley. When it ended, only silence remained, and from that silence she had been found the lone survivor, bleeding and terrified, yet breathing. The Apache chief had ordered her carried to his camp, not as a trophy or a prisoner, but for reasons even his men did not understand. Perhaps it was the way her trembling hand had still tried to shield a wounded child, or maybe it was something in her eyes, something that stirred an old memory he thought long buried. Now she lay upon a bed of furs, her chest rising weakly with every breath. The flicker of firelight danced over her face, softening the dirt and the bruises. Her hair, tangled and dusty, framed her features like a wild halo. The chief knelt beside her, his shadow broad and steady, his long black hair falling over his shoulders. His body was built like the stone ridges that surrounded his homeland, strong, carved by struggle, marked by small tribal tattoos that told stories of battles and loss. Around his neck hung pieces of old silver and beads, tokens from his ancestors. His hands, though calloused from war and weather, moved with the gentleness of a healer as he checked her wounds. She woke with a gasp, her eyes wide in fear. The first thing she saw was his face, lit by the fire, fierce, unreadable, yet strangely calm. She tried to move, to pull away, but pain shot through her side, forcing a cry from her lips. The chief pressed a steady hand on her shoulder, his voice low and firm. "Don't move. You've been hurt bad." His words were accented, deep, but his tone carried a strange kind of care. She turned her face away, her breathing sharp, whispering a prayer under her breath, as if begging for this to be a dream. He reached for a small clay bowl beside the fire. Inside it was a mixture of crushed herbs and oil, glowing faintly under the light. "You were bleeding when I found you," he said quietly. "You need rest. Fever's coming." She closed her eyes, refusing to look at him. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Your people kill ours." The chief's hand paused for a moment. His dark eyes met hers, calm, steady, almost sorrowful. "You were dying," he answered simply. "I could not leave you to the coyotes." The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks like tiny shooting stars. The smell of sage filled the tent. Outside, the night deepened, and the soft beat of drums from the distant fires of the tribe rose like a heartbeat. She could hear faint laughter of children somewhere beyond, and the gentle murmur of women speaking in a language she did not understand. The world outside that tent was alive, and yet she felt trapped between fear and confusion, caught inside this strange man's mercy. The chief dipped a cloth in warm water and began cleaning the wound along her ribs. She flinched, biting back a scream, but his hand was steady. "It will burn," he said quietly. "But it will heal." She wanted to hate him. He was supposed to be the enemy, the savage, the raider. Yet as the moments passed, the anger faded beneath the warmth of his hands and the sound of his calm voice. For the first time in days, she felt the faintest sense of safety. But that safety was confusing, almost frightening in itself. He sat back, studying her in silence. Her eyes, glassy with fever, caught the reflection of the firelight. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter." His lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Everything matters," he said softly. Then, after a long pause, he added, "You are safe here. No one will touch you." The way he said it, quiet, final, made her believe him, though she did not know why. Hours passed. The wind outside grew colder. The chief remained near her, watching the shadows dance across the tent walls. She drifted in and out of restless sleep, haunted by flashes of the ambush, the screams, the smoke, the hands dragging her away. At times she would wake and find him still there, his posture unchanging, his gaze distant, as if burdened by memories of his own. Once when she stirred and whimpered from pain, he moved closer, his voice breaking the silence again. "You must be still," he murmured. "The pain will ease." In the dim light he prepared another poultice, the scent of cedar and herbs heavy in the air. As he leaned over her to apply it, she could feel the warmth of his breath, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat close to her ear. For a moment, their worlds so different, so divided by blood and history, felt dangerously close. He spoke again, his voice low, but charged with something deeper now, something both tender and commanding. "I need to help you," he whispered, his hand resting gently on her arm. "If you move, it will hurt more." The words were soft, yet they carried a strange weight, as if meaning something beyond healing. Her heart pounded. She looked up at him, at the lines of strength in his face, at the scar near his shoulder that told of battles fought long before she was born. There was no cruelty in his eyes, only an intensity that drew her in despite every warning she'd ever heard about men like him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. His gaze lingered on her for a moment before he looked away, adding a few more drops of oil to the fire. The flames flared, painting his skin in bronze and gold. "Because once," he said quietly, "someone did the same for me." Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains, faint but growing closer. The night had turned heavy, the kind that made the air hum with energy. Inside the tent, the fire dimmed to a glow. She felt herself drifting again, her body weak, her thoughts tangled between fear and something unfamiliar. Trust, perhaps. The chief adjusted the blanket around her, his fingers brushing lightly against her wrist. "Sleep," he said, his voice softer than before. "You'll need your strength." But she could not sleep. Every sound seemed louder. The fire, the rain starting to fall, his breathing. She could sense him watching her, not with hunger, but with something even more unsettling, compassion, the kind that came from a place of deep understanding. When he spoke again, it was in a whisper that barely reached her ears. "I need to make love. Don't move or it will hurt more." The words came not with desire, but with the quiet urgency of a man caught between duty and feeling. His tone was filled with both pain and care, as though he were fighting something inside himself. For a heartbeat, she didn't understand. Then she saw the trembling in his hands, the way his eyes softened, as if weighed by an impossible decision. The rain outside turned into a steady drumming, echoing the pulse of her racing heart. The fire flickered low, shadows stretching long and dark across the tent. He leaned closer, his breath brushing against her temple, his voice shaking slightly now, though he tried to hide it. "You are safe," he murmured again. "But if I lose control, it will hurt us both." The words hung heavy in the air, filled with meaning she could not yet grasp. Her breath caught. The world outside the tent faded into silence. Only the fire remained, burning low between them, casting a glow that made it hard to tell where danger ended and tenderness began. And in that breath of stillness, just before dawn broke, neither of them knew how much their lives were about to change forever. The night rain did not stop until morning. By then the valley was washed clean, the air heavy with the smell of wet sage and smoke. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the roof of the tent, dimly lit by the gray light filtering through the seams. Her body felt sore, but her head was clearer. For a moment she thought she was back in her family's wagon, that the nightmare of the ambush had been only a dream. Then she heard the steady beat of a drum outside, the sound of men chanting low and rhythmic, and she knew where she was. The Apache chief was still there, seated near the fire. He had not slept. His eyes were fixed on the burning coals, his face calm but unreadable. When she stirred, he looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something human in his gaze, something almost gentle. "You live," he said softly. The fever broke in the night. She tried to sit up, but pain bit through her side again, forcing her to stop. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice rough. "Why didn't you just let me die?" He didn't answer at first. He poured water from a clay pot into a small wooden cup and handed it to her. She hesitated before taking it, her hand trembling as she drank. The coolness of it soothed her throat. He finally spoke, his tone quiet but firm. "Because life is sacred," he said. "Even yours." His words confused her. The men who raided her wagon, were they not his kind? Did they not ride under his command? She remembered the chaos, the smoke, the sound of gunfire, and the screams. "Your warriors killed them all," she said bitterly. "My family, my people." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, his calm cracked. "Your soldiers burned my village," he said slowly. "They killed children and called it justice. I fight because your people came with rifles and took the land of my fathers. But you were not my enemy that day. We're caught in the storm." The silence that followed was heavy. The rain outside turned to a drizzle, soft against the hides of the tent. She wanted to hate him, to hold on to the anger that kept her heart from breaking. But the way he spoke, measured, almost weary, made it hard to see him as the monster she had been taught to fear. He stood and went to the tent flap, looking out toward the gray morning. Beyond the camp, she could see the outlines of other shelters and fires. The movement of women tending to pots, and the laughter of children running barefoot through the wet earth. The world here felt alive, raw, and untamed. For a moment, she forgot the fear and simply watched. "What will happen to me?" she asked quietly. He looked back at her. "You will stay until you are strong," he said. "Then you may go." "Go where?" "Wherever the wind takes you," he replied. "But you will not make it far unless you heal first." He turned back toward the fire, adding another piece of wood. The light flared again, painting his skin in shades of bronze and gold. She noticed the faint scars across his shoulders, marks of past battles, of survival. Something in her chest tightened. "Do your people trust you?" she asked after a moment. "For helping me?" He gave a short, dry laugh. "They obey me," he said. "That is not the same as trust." He knelt again beside her, checking the bandage at her side. "Some believe mercy is weakness, but I have seen too much death to believe that anymore." She watched his hands as he worked, strong, careful, never rough. The smell of herbs filled the air again. "You speak English well?" she said softly. "My mother was taken by settlers," he replied, his eyes distant. "She learned their words. When I was young, she taught them to me before she died. I remember her voice when I speak." There was a sadness in the way he said it, a quiet grief that made her throat tighten. For the first time, she realized he was not much older than she was, perhaps only a few years beyond 30, yet he carried the weight of many lifetimes. Outside, the clouds began to break, revealing a strip of blue sky over the mountains. The rain stopped completely. The air shimmered with heat as the sun returned, turning the wet earth into rising steam. The sound of drums faded, replaced by the neighing of horses and the distant cries of hawks. Life in the camp continued, ordinary and steady, as if nothing inside that tent had changed. But everything between them had. She tried to rest again, but her thoughts wouldn't stop. The memory of his words the night before kept echoing in her mind, those strange, gentle words that had both comforted and frightened her. "I need to make love. Don't move or it will hurt more." She knew he hadn't meant them the way they sounded, yet something inside her stirred each time she remembered them. Maybe it was because no man had ever spoken to her with such quiet intensity, as if her pain mattered. He moved to the side of the tent and began sharpening his knife on a stone, the rhythmic sound breaking the silence. "You think I am your enemy," he said suddenly. "But there are worse men than me in your world and mine. Outlaws, soldiers, traitors who sell lives like cattle." He looked at her then, his eyes steady. "If they find you before you can walk, they will not show mercy." She felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the fire. "Then what will you do with me?" His hand stopped on the blade. "I will decide when the time comes," he said simply. Days passed, marked by the slow rhythm of recovery. She learned that his name, when spoken by the others, meant something like hawk who waits. The tribe respected him, feared him perhaps, but they also looked to him as a man of honor. Each morning he would ride out with his warriors, leaving her under the care of an older woman who brought food and water. Each evening he returned, silent and watchful. Sometimes he would sit by the fire, carving patterns into wood, saying little. Other times he would speak of the land, the rivers that had dried, the herds that had vanished, the promises broken by treaties no one remembered signing. His words painted a picture of a world crumbling under the weight of change. She began to see the truth of it in small things. The way the children played with sticks instead of toys. The way the men looked toward the horizon as if expecting another storm of soldiers. This land was his home, yet it was slipping away piece by piece. And she, a woman from the world taking it, did not know what to feel anymore. One night, a group of warriors returned from the hills carrying something wrapped in hides. Voices rose outside, tense and urgent. The chief stepped out, his face hardening as he listened. Moments later, he re-entered, his expression grim. "Soldiers are near," he said. "A patrol moving west." Her heart jumped. "Americans?" "Yes," he said. "Your people." She pushed herself up, ignoring the pain. "They can help me. Go with them." He looked at her for a long time, his face shadowed by the firelight. "You think they will take you back kindly?" he asked. "You were found in my camp?" "They will see you as one of us now." She froze, the truth sinking in. "That's not true," she whispered. "Isn't it?" he said quietly. "They will not care what happened. They will care only that you survived among Apaches." The thought terrified her more than she expected. For the first time, the idea of leaving didn't feel safe. She didn't know which world would be crueler now. He turned toward the tent flap, his voice low but firm. "You will stay hidden until they pass. But if they find you," he stopped her with a look. "I have lived with danger all my life. This is no different." She wanted to protest. To tell him she didn't want more bloodshed because of her, but the words wouldn't come. He stepped outside, leaving her with only the sound of the fire. Through the thin walls of the tent, she could hear the distant shouts. The movement of horses, the sound of thunder that wasn't thunder, it was rifles. Fear gripped her chest as she pressed her hand to the wound on her side. Then, from outside, she heard his voice again, calm, commanding, echoing through the chaos. It was the voice of a man who carried not just power but something deeper, something that bound every soul around him. When the noise faded and the wind returned, she knew one thing for certain. The line between enemy and savior had blurred completely. And whatever he was to her now, protector, captor, or something in between, her fate was tied to his in ways she could no longer escape. The next morning dawned quiet. Something in the air felt wrong. The camp moved slower than usual, every sound heavier, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Smoke from the dying fires rose straight up into the pale sky, and the horses at the edge of the camp snorted uneasily. She could sense it even before she saw the chief return from his patrol. Something had changed. He entered the tent without a word, his shoulders tense, and his face shadowed by exhaustion. Dust streaked his arms and chest, and his long hair was tangled from the wind. She watched him as he poured water into a wooden bowl and washed his hands, the movement calm but deliberate. He looked different today, not the quiet, guarded man she had begun to understand, but something harder, colder. "What happened?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "They found the patrol," he said finally. 3 soldiers, 2 dead, 1 alive." She froze. "Alive." "He will tell others," he said. "They will come here." The words dropped heavy between them. For days she had tried to push away the thought that her people might find this place. Now that it was real, she didn't know whether to feel hope or dread. "Then we should leave," she said. "You can move the camp hide in the mountains." His mouth curved slightly, but it wasn't a smile. "You think it is that simple?" he said. "They know this land now. They will burn it if they must." She looked down at her hands, clutching the edge of the blanket. "I don't want anyone else to die because of me." He studied her in silence for a long moment, then said quietly, "You are not the reason. War began before you came. You are only a piece caught in the storm." Outside voices were rising. She could hear the sharp tones of men arguing, their language harsh and fast. She couldn't understand the words, but the anger in them was clear. She turned toward the sound, her heart pounding. "They're blaming me, aren't they?" He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. That night, when the wind rose again, she couldn't sleep. The fire burned low, throwing restless shadows across the tent walls. She watched him as he sat by the doorway, sharpening his blade by the light. His expression was distant, his thoughts somewhere far beyond her reach. For the first time since she arrived, she saw how heavy the burden of leadership was on him. The tribe looked to him for safety, but who protected him? The thought surprised her. She shouldn't care, and yet she did. "You could go," she said quietly. "If they come, you could leave me and save your people." He didn't stop working the blade, but his eyes flicked toward her and let them take you. "No, they would kill you, or worse. You do not know what your soldiers have become out here." She swallowed hard. "They're not all the same. Neither are we," he said softly. And for a moment his voice carried something almost gentle again. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the tent poles. He stood and stepped out, leaving her alone with the fire. The sound of his footsteps faded, but her thoughts did not. Every word he said lingered, twisting inside her chest. When dawn came, the camp was already awake. Warriors rode out in small groups, scouts fanning into the desert. She saw the older women packing supplies, tying bundles with quiet urgency. A storm of motion and fear hung in the air. Something was coming. By midday, the chief returned with 3 men. They carried rifles taken from soldiers, and their faces were grim. He entered the tent, his voice low. "They are 2 days away," he said. "Full company, maybe more." She felt the blood drain from her face. "Then you have to go. Please." He shook his head. "If we run, they will follow. They will bring others. This land will bleed forever. Then what will you do?" He looked down at her, his eyes dark and calm, but there was something fierce beneath them. "We fight where we stand." She stared at him, unable to speak. There was no fear in his tone, only certainty. It wasn't pride that drove him, it was duty. The kind that came from generations of men who refused to kneel, even when the world turned against them. That night, the camp gathered around the central fire. The warriors sat in silence while the old men spoke, their voices weaving tales of ancestors who had faced impossible odds. The chief sat at the edge of the circle, saying little, his gaze fixed on the flames. She watched from the shadows, her heart heavy. For the first time, she saw not savages, but a people trying to survive in a world that no longer had room for them. When the gathering ended, he found her waiting outside the tent. The moon was rising, cold and bright, casting silver light over the camp. He stopped a few steps away, his face unreadable. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't," she whispered. "Not when I know what's coming." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "Fear will not stop what must happen," he said. "But courage may change how it ends." She met his eyes. "You think courage will save you?" "No," he said quietly. "But it will save what we stand for." A gust of wind swept between them, carrying the scent of smoke and cedar. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek, the gesture slow, almost hesitant. "You are different from them," he said. "You listen." She wanted to speak, to deny it, but her voice caught in her throat. His touch was steady, his eyes locked on hers, and for a heartbeat, the world around them disappeared. The firelight flickered across his skin, turning his eyes to molten amber. She could feel the warmth of his palm, the faint tremor beneath the surface of his strength. Then he drew back, his voice rough. "Rest now. Tomorrow. The sun will rise on a world that will not be the same." The next day brought more than heat. A thick haze settled over the desert, as if the earth itself sensed what was coming. The chief ordered the women and children to move toward the canyon, deeper into the mountains. She begged to go with them, but he refused. "If they find you there," he said, "they will follow the trail. You stay here until I return." "Return?" she repeated, her heart sinking. "You're going to fight?" He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I have no choice." As the warriors rode out, the sound of hooves thundered through the valley, echoing off the rocks. She stood at the edge of the camp, watching them disappear into the horizon, the dust rising behind them like smoke from a fire that could never be put out. Hours passed. The camp felt hollow without them. Only the old and the injured remained, moving like shadows through the quiet. She sat near the dying fire, her mind torn between hope and fear. Every distant sound made her flinch. Then, sometime near dusk, she heard the first shot. It came from far away, sharp and lonely, then another, then a burst that rolled like thunder across the land. Her heart raced. The war had found them. She ran to the edge of the camp, ignoring the pain in her side. From the ridge, she could see the faint outline of smoke rising beyond the hills. The sky above was streaked with fire. Somewhere out there he was fighting, not just for his people, but for something she could not yet name. The old woman who had cared for her pulled her back toward the tent, speaking rapidly in Apache, her voice trembling. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the fear. The woman pointed toward the canyon, urging her to go. But she couldn't. Something held her there. Something stronger than reason. As the night fell, the gunfire grew distant. The wind carried the smell of ash and blood. She sat by the fire, trembling, listening to the desert breathe around her. Then, from the darkness beyond the camp, she heard footsteps slow, heavy, dragging. Her heart stopped. Shadow appeared at the edge of the firelight. It was him. He was bleeding, his chest streaked with dust and blood, his eyes fierce but dim. He stumbled once before catching himself, and when she ran to him, he caught her arm before she could speak. "They're coming," he whispered. "We have little time." She tried to hold him up, her hands trembling. "You're hurt." He smiled faintly, a ghost of the man she knew. "It will heal," he said, though his voice was weak. He looked past her, toward the horizon where the smoke still rose. But the war will not. The fire crackled between them, and in the distance, the echo of horses grew louder again. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The desert night had turned to smoke and thunder. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder, the cries of wounded men, and the crack of rifles echoing through the valley. She could see flashes of fire on the far ridge, streaks of light tearing through the darkness. Every shot made her heart jump, each one a reminder that the man she cared for was somewhere out there fighting for his people, and maybe for her too. He staggered into the tent again, his breath ragged, his shoulder bleeding where a bullet had grazed him. His skin glistened with sweat and dust, his long black hair sticking to his neck. She ran to him, grabbing a cloth from the fire pit to stop the bleeding. "You can't go back out there," she said, her voice breaking. "You're already hurt." He caught her hand, his grip firm but trembling. "If I don't, they'll reach the canyon. The women and children will be trapped. You can't fight alone," she pleaded. "Let me help." He gave a tired smile, shaking his head. "You've already done enough. You've lived when death wanted you. That is help enough." Outside, the camp had fallen into chaos. Warriors were returning to gather more arrows, some dragging their wounded brothers across the dirt. The cries of pain mixed with the sound of horses screaming and fires crackling. The night felt alive with anger and fear. She could hear the soldiers shouting commands in English now. They were close, too close. She tore a strip from her dress and wrapped it tightly around his wound. "If they reach this camp," she whispered, "they'll kill everyone." He met her gaze, his dark eyes steady even through the pain. "Then we will make them believe we still have an army left to fight." He pushed himself to his feet, wincing but refusing to falter. The flickering light of the fire lit his face, making the tattoos on his chest gleam like symbols of strength. "Stay inside," he ordered. "If they come, hide. Do not run. They shoot at anything that moves." When he stepped outside, she followed him to the edge of the tent, ignoring his command. She could see the line of fire spreading across the horizon where the soldiers advanced. The Apache warriors, though fewer, moved with fierce resolve, striking from the shadows, vanishing into the smoke. The chief raised his arm, giving a sharp call in his native tongue, and the remaining men rallied around him. For a moment, it seemed the earth itself listened to him. The first explosion came from the western ridge. Cannon shell ripped through the silence, shaking the ground. The blast sent sand and fire flying into the air. She fell to her knees, covering her ears as dust poured into the tent. When the echo faded, she crawled to the entrance again. The chief was still standing, framed against the burning horizon, his silhouette dark and unbroken. He turned once, catching her eyes across the distance, and in that instant, she understood something wordless passing between them. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even love in the simple way she had known it before. It was something deeper in understanding that bound two souls caught in a war neither had chosen. Then he vanished into the smoke. Hours blurred together. She could no longer tell whether it was midnight or morning. The camp was half in ruins now. Fires burned through the empty tents, and the cries of men echoed through the valley. She crouched low near the fire, clutching one of the old woman's charms between her fingers, praying for him to return. The sound of boots drew closer, the heavy, deliberate steps of soldiers moving through the wreckage. Her breath caught. She could hear their voices now, rough and unfamiliar, calling out orders as they searched. "Check every tent," one shouted. "They're hiding? Bring them out." She froze. The footsteps grew louder until the flap of her tent lifted. A soldier stepped inside, his rifle raised. His face was streaked with ash, his uniform torn. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. She didn't look like an enemy, not in her torn dress, not with her hair tangled and eyes wide with fear. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, lowering the gun a little. "You're American?" She nodded quickly. "Please don't shoot. I was taken prisoner." He frowned by them. He glanced over his shoulder toward the chaos outside. "Where's their chief?" Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. She wanted to say she didn't know, that he was gone. But before she could speak, another voice answered from behind the soldier, a voice she recognized instantly. "He's right here." The soldier spun around, raising his weapon, but he was too slow. The Apache chief emerged from the smoke like a spirit of the desert, striking the rifle aside with his arm. The two men collided, grappling in the dust. She cried out as the gun went off, the flash lighting the tent for a heartbeat. The soldier fell, his body collapsing beside the fire pit. The chief stood over him, breathing hard, blood dripping from his arm. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her eyes were wide with terror. "You killed him?" He looked down at the fallen man, his jaw tightening. "He would have killed you." Outside, more voices were shouting now. The other soldiers had heard the shot. He stepped toward her, his tone urgent. "We must leave. Now." She hesitated. "Where will we go?" "There's a trail behind the canyon," he said. "Old and hidden. They won't find it before sunrise." He grabbed a torch and a small pouch of supplies before pulling her out into the night. The camp was a sea of smoke and embers. Bodies lay scattered, warriors and soldiers alike. The sky was glowing red from the fires. Every direction looked like ruin. But he didn't slow down. He led her through the maze of wreckage, his hand never letting go of hers. They reached the outer ridge where the wind howled across the cliffs. The horses had scattered, frightened by the battle, but one remained, a brown stallion trembling with fear. He mounted quickly and pulled her up behind him. "Hold on," he said, and the horse lunged forward, galloping into the dark. The ride through the canyon was like flying through a nightmare. The wind tore at her hair, and the sound of gunfire echoed faintly behind them. The path was narrow, lined with sharp rocks and loose sand. More than once, the horse nearly slipped. She clung to him, her fingers gripping the leather strap around his chest, feeling his heartbeat pounding under her hands. Finally, they reached the upper pass, where the land opened into a narrow valley surrounded by high stone walls. He slowed the horse, dismounted, and helped her down.
Ow.
The air here was still, thick with the smell of smoke drifting from below. He stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the flames spread across the desert. "They'll keep coming," she said softly behind him. "They won't stop." He nodded. "I know. Then what are you fighting for?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why not run? Why not hide?" He turned to her, his eyes fierce, reflecting the glow of the burning land. "Because if I run now, I lose everything my people lived and died for. This land remembers them. Every stone, every river. To abandon it is to let them vanish forever." His words struck deep, cutting through her fear. She had been raised to believe this land was meant to be tamed, claimed, built upon, but standing there beside him, she saw what he meant. The desert wasn't empty, it was alive, full of ghosts and stories and blood. A distant rumble rolled through the night. More soldiers were coming. Their torches flickered on the horizon, weaving through the canyon like a trail of fire. He stepped closer to her, his voice low. "They'll find us soon." She swallowed hard. "Then we fight?" He shook his head. "No, not you." He took her hand and pressed something into it, a small carved pendant, smooth and warm. "If I fall," he said, "this will keep you safe.
Ow.
Show it to anyone from my tribe. They will know who you are." Her throat tightened. "You're talking like you're not coming back." He looked at her for a long moment, the firelight flickering across his face. "I've lived with death too long to fear it," he said. "But there are some things I won't let die." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "And what if I won't let you die either?" For a second, everything stopped. The wind, the fire, the sound of the approaching soldiers. He reached out, brushing his fingers against her cheek, his touch lingering as if memorizing her face. "Then the gods will have to wait," he said quietly. A sudden burst of gunfire broke the silence, echoing through the canyon. The soldiers had reached the ridge. The horse reared, startled, and the chief turned sharply, his hand going to his knife. The sky lit up again, the flames painting their faces in gold and red. She clutched the pendant in her hand, her heart racing. The air was thick with smoke and fear. He stepped forward, ready to face the oncoming storm. And just before he disappeared into the firelight again, he looked back at her one last time. His eyes calm but burning with the same fierce tenderness that had haunted her since the night they met. The sound of the battle grew louder, filling the canyon like a heartbeat. The fire roared, the wind screamed, and the world held its breath as the moment of fate drew near. The firestorm that followed tore through the canyon like a beast awakened. The soldiers advanced under the moonlight, their torches blazing, their boots grinding the sand. The chief met them head-on, his body moving with the strength of desperation and purpose. From where she stood, hidden behind the rocks, she could see flashes of metal and hear the clash of steel against steel. Every sound made her heart seize. The horse beside her shifted nervously, sensing her fear. Smoke rolled through the valley, thick and choking. She could see the silhouettes of the men fighting, each strike throwing up sparks like falling stars. The Apache chief moved through them like a shadow, his knife flashing in the glow of the fire. But there were too many. She could hear the distant shouts of English commands and the cries of dying men, both soldier and warrior alike. Her hands shook as she clutched the small pendant he had given her. It was carved from bone, etched with strange markings that caught the light. She pressed it to her chest and whispered a prayer she didn't even know she believed in. She wanted to run to him, but the promise she'd made, his words echoing in her mind, held her back. The battle raged until the first light of dawn broke over the cliffs. The sky turned pale pink and gold, the desert wind cooling the flames. When the noise faded and the smoke began to settle, she could no longer tell who had lived and who had fallen. Only the sound of the wind remained. She waited as the sun climbed higher, her eyes fixed on the ridge where he had disappeared. Every moment stretched longer than the last. Then, at last, she saw movement among the rocks, a dark figure stumbling toward her. He was alive, but barely. Blood darkened his side, and his steps were slow, heavy. She ran to him, tears burning in her eyes. He tried to smile when she reached him, his voice hoarse. "You should have gone and leave you," she whispered. "I couldn't." He sank to his knees, his body trembling. She caught him, holding him up as best she could. The rising sun painted the desert in soft gold, turning the sand into rivers of light. Around them, the battlefield was silent. Only the smoke drifted now, curling toward the sky like ghosts saying goodbye. She tore a strip of fabric and pressed it against his wound, but the bleeding didn't stop. He caught her hand, his grip weak but warm. "It's done," he said softly. "I'll not return soon. They've lost too much." "You've saved them," she said. "Your people are safe." His eyes, dark and deep as the canyon itself, met hers. "No one is safe forever," he said. "But they will live another day." "That is enough." Tears blurred her vision as she brushed the dirt from his face. "You're not dying," she said. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and peace. "Death is not the end," he said. "It is only another road. You must take the one that still leads forward." She shook her head, unable to speak. He lifted his hand slowly, touching the pendant still hanging around her neck. "Keep it," he whispered. "It will remind you of what was real." The wind stirred, lifting his hair across his face. The firelight of the night was gone, replaced by the soft glow of morning. He closed his eyes then, his breathing slowing, his body going still against her arms. The world fell quiet except for the sound of the wind over the stone. She sat there long after the sun had climbed high, holding him as the shadows shortened. When she finally rose, her heart felt hollow, but full of something she couldn't name. Love, loss, understanding, maybe all of them together. She buried him near the cliffs where the desert met the sky, marking the place with a circle of stones. The pendant she kept around her neck, pressing it close whenever the wind whispered his name. The soldiers never came back to the canyon, By the time they regrouped, the Apache camp had vanished into the mountains, leaving only ashes behind. She found the old woman and a few of the others along the river's edge days later. They were wary of her at first, unsure if she belonged. But when they saw the pendant resting against her heart, their suspicion turned to quiet respect. They helped her build a small shelter near the edge of the forest, and for a time she lived among them, learning their ways, listening to their songs, tending to the children who had lost their fathers in the fight. Sometimes at night, when the stars filled the sky like scattered fire, she would sit by the river and hear his voice again. It was faint, carried by the wind, saying the words that had haunted her since that first night in his tent. "I need to make love. Don't move, or it will hurt more." But now she understood the truth of those words. They had never been about passion alone. They were about healing, about two broken souls, trying to find life again in the middle of pain. Seasons changed. War between the settlers and the tribes faded, swallowed by newer conflicts and forgotten promises. But she remained there, a quiet woman in a cabin of wood and stone, known only as the one who carried the chief's token. People whispered stories about her. Some said she was a spirit, others that she had once been a captive who turned into something more. Years passed before she ever saw the world beyond those hills again. One spring morning, a group of travelers came through the valley, heading east. She watched them from the ridge, their wagons creaking under the weight of new beginnings. For a moment she thought of joining them. The world beyond called her name, but the land beneath her feet held her heart. Before she returned to her cabin, she rode to the place where she had buried him. The stones were still there, though worn smooth by time and wind. She knelt beside them, her hands brushing the dust away. "You were right," she whispered. "The land remembers." The sun was setting behind her, casting the sky in red and gold. She felt the warmth of it on her face, and a calm settled over her that she hadn't known in years. She closed her eyes, letting the silence speak. Somewhere far away, she could almost hear his voice again, soft, steady, full of that same strength that once pulled her from the edge of death. When she rose, the night had come. The stars stretched endlessly above her, bright as they had been the first time he looked at her across the fire. She mounted her horse and turned toward home. The desert wind rose behind her, carrying the sound of the river, the rustle of grass, the faint echo of drums from a memory long gone. Her story would never be written in books or carved in stone, but it lived in the whispers of the wind and in the rhythm of the earth. Somewhere beyond the mountains, new settlers would come, and the world would change again. But for her, time had already stopped in that one moment when a wounded Apache chief whispered words that bound to hearts across worlds. She returned to her cabin and lit a single candle. The flame danced gently, flickering against the wooden walls. She placed the pendant beside it, watching the shadows it cast. Then she smiled, not with sadness, but with peace. Outside, the night stretched wide and silent. The desert slept, holding its secrets, its sorrows, and its love stories within the endless sand. And though no one knew her name anymore, the land remembered the river, the wind. The stones by the cliff all carried the story of a woman who found love in a place where hate was supposed to live, and a man who fought for honor until his last breath. The fire dimmed slowly, and the stars above glowed steady and calm. In that stillness, it felt as though the world itself paused for a moment to honor what they had been. And as the wind swept softly through the canyon, it carried with it the last whisper of his voice tender, eternal, and full of the same promise he made long ago under the firelight. "You are safe now."